Our guest today is Cathy Conlon, who's head of corporate issuer strategy and product management for Broadridge up near New York City. Cathy's going to talk to us about virtual meetings. Broadridge has been the heavyweight in that area for quite some time, but they had phenomenal growth last year due to the pandemic, and this year promises to even be a bigger year for virtual meetings. So we have a lot to talk about. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. Cathy, thanks so much for doing this. Broadridge has been on the cutting edge, the leading edge of virtual shareholders meetings for quite some time now. You just put out a press release with some new innovations for the 2021 season. Looking forward to learning more about those. As I understand from the press release, some of those will be dribbled out over the next few weeks. We're taping this right before Thanksgiving. So by the time this video is live, we'll know more. So the first question I have for you is about the calendar, the practical stuff. How much advance notice does Broadridge need for a company to tell you what their annual shareholders meeting date is in case it's one of those popular days, you know, in April or in May, when there might be a lot of meetings on a single day?
Hi, Brock, and thank you for having me. Really happy to be here talking to you about this topic. In terms of how early we need to know to work with clients in terms of the dates they want, I think it somewhat depends on the date they want. And by that, I mean, certain dates are much more popular than others. The third week in May, for example, the third Thursday in May being maybe the single most popular day of annual meetings that we've seen in the past. You'd want to sort of start booking early if you want 10 a.m. on that day to make sure you get your time slot. We have plenty of capacity. The technology enables, plenty of capacity, but the reality is that we do provide a person to support every meeting. You want someone on your meeting that's going to be working with you the whole way, managing the day of meeting, all the work that goes on with that. So we do have people that are associated with every meeting. So really that's the big limitation, that, you want to have the person who you're working with be there with you. So if a certain date and time is very important to you, you should definitely, we are allowing clients to book their meetings now if they want to. Now, if your date is, some companies seem to have a little more flexibility than others, or if your meeting's on a Monday or a Friday, for example, those seem to be much less popular days. And so there's really plenty of capacity, I would say almost unlimited at this point. From the perspective of the timing that we need, we only need to know, we can turn the VSM platform on pretty quickly, within 24 hours. It's really, the dependency is more on the issuer side, on the client side, where they have to, get their proxy materials ready and printed and distributed. So that's really the limitation on their side. We have the ability to turn things around very quickly as needed, and that's kind of as shown this year, where we had companies that had already mailed their proxy materials and then switched to a virtual meeting, a week before the event, because they had to make that switch because of COVID. So we can operate pretty quickly, assuming the company can operate as, in that same time frame.
I think of it sort of like weddings, June weddings, September, October are the popular months. And so you need to book your hall early. So let's talk about the Q&As. I think companies that did not provide good opportunity for Q&A will be under more pressure this year. That's what institutional investors are saying. And then ISS just updated their voting policies to encourage companies to disclose the circumstances that if they're having a virtual only meeting, that they allow for comparable rights and opportunities for shareholders to participate electronically. How does your platform facilitate Q&A?
So Q&A, that's a very important question with regard to virtual meetings, as we know. So there's really three ways, up until now, that we've allowed companies to receive questions from their shareholders around their virtual meeting. Number one is pre-meeting. We can accept the questions during the solicitation period on the proxyvote.com site. So some clients use that option. And then live during the meeting, there's two options. Number one is the text box on the meeting page, where shareholders who are validated into the meeting can submit their questions via the text box. They type it in, they hit submit, the question goes to the company. Number three option is the phone line questions, which is where there is a live operator phone line, much like an earnings call would have, an operator queuing up, investors asking questions. It's the same concept, where the operator will allow shareholders to be asking their questions verbally. So those are the three ways historically. From a percentage perspective, by far the most popular way that we've seen companies take questions is via the text box live during the meeting. So that's sort of the scenario that we're most commonly seeing. I agree with you that I think getting this right is very important for companies if they want to have a smooth meeting and want everyone to be in agreement that they did the right thing. Things that we're enhancing with our platform include the ability to display the questions as they are coming in. There's a very large concern that companies are hiding behind the technology and not allowing shareholder questions to be heard. So I think that's an important thing that we as a platform provider have to do, is to give the option to issuers that they can allow shareholders to see other questions that are being submitted. I'm not sure, and I've heard companies say, not every company may want this option. There are, times when questions that are submitted are not really germane to the meeting and they're not relevant. So I think some companies would probably like the option to screen the questions and only show those that are pertinent to what's happening at the meeting. But at any case, we will offer the option for issuers to be able to present all the questions and comments that are coming in via the text box.
And does your platform have special features to allow shareholder proponents to speak, or individual directors, or the inspector of election, or the auditor representative? Or is that something that more on the company side about how to handle it?
So we do have the ability to support all sort of participants in a meeting, whether if it's the board, the C-suite, whoever's handling the meeting. They can be on either in an audio or video way into a meeting. In terms of shareholder proponents, and this is a very important question, we had about just a little under 200 meetings between January and June, so just sort of during what we consider proxy season last year, that had shareholder proponents. The vast majority, over 90%, had the proponents in on a phone line. So there was an operator-assisted phone line. The phone number was given to the proponent. The proponents called in. They were placed in the meeting on hold, from speaking until it was their time to speak. Then the operator opened up the phone line at the appropriate time, and that shareholder proponent was able to read in their proposal. So that's how the majority of companies on our platform, which had shareholder proponents, enabled it. And I think it was interesting to see, because a lot of the proponents are, the same people are at multiple meetings, and we had a couple of days where we had proponents on multiple meetings in the same day, which is obviously only doable in a virtual setting. So I think for the most part that experience worked. We did have some situations where companies allowed the proponent to pre-record their proposal, and we can feed that into the meeting. That's actually a good option, or a good backup option for the proponent, to have, you can have the recording on the ready, so that if for some reason the proponent didn't connect to the meeting at the appropriate time, they could always roll that in. But for the most part, the phone line is a really easy option, and the proponents, I think, are now used to it. The least common option that we saw was proponents not being able to be at the meeting. I'm not sure we saw that at all. I know I heard that happened at some meetings. I'm not sure it happened at any Broadridge meetings, but again, that's the company's decision how they're going to do that. Our platform enables what the company wants.
And you've already touched upon this, but just so we're clear, how can members of the company, other than by video, communicate with the attendees during the meeting? You mentioned a chat box.
So generally, we do not have a chat feature between the company and the attendees at the meeting. It is generally, the shareholders submit their questions to the company, and then the company responds to those questions, or they take them verbally. If the shareholders have any difficulty or technical requirements, we do have live operators that are available to support those shareholders, and we have a multi-way communication open. So if there are any issues going on, we can address those questions to the company while the meeting is happening, so we can resolve any issues that any shareholder may be having. Now, if it's a proponent, they're on the phone line, they are actually in touch with the company. So it depends on the scenario to some extent, but we think there are meaningful ways for shareholders to be connected to the meeting, and if they have any issues, to address them. Again, we don't have a specific chat feature back and forth, not something that we are adding to the platform coming up, but it's been on the roadmap item, and at some point we may see it if we think it becomes necessary, or if companies really want to be able to chat back and forth with shareholders live during the meeting.
or shareholders communicating with each other.
with each other.
Sort of like a Facebook thing. What about,
Yeah.
and I don't think there's a big demand for that. So I don't see companies, even if you had that functionality, I'm not sure companies would really want it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned pre-recorded presentations from proponents. So it sounds like companies obviously can use their own pre-recorded presentations.
Yes.
Is that hard to do?
No, that's easy to do. And actually, I think that's a great enhancement to a virtual meeting. It really does bring, especially if it's some kind of, video message, I just think that adds a lot of value to a meeting. As a matter of fact, Broadridge, we had our virtual shareholder meeting in November, and we had, we played a video, and then we, just showed that before we started the formal presentation. Many other companies did that over the course of this year. And it is a really good thing to be able to sort of add a nice dynamic element to the meeting. But the pre-record doesn't have to be just a video pre-record, by the way. It can be an audio-only pre-record. So if there's a portion of the meeting that a company wants to pre-record and then feed into the meeting, we can easily do that as well. So I think there's a lot of options depending on what the company wants to include in the meeting. There can be multiple things, an audio meeting, some audio recordings, some video recordings. So there's some nice options that companies have to include in the meeting. And it's very simple. We really kind of do the whole thing for them. They create the recording and then we just feed it into the meeting. We're following along with their script. So we get the script in advance. So whoever's managing the meeting on our side is following along. We know exactly when, the records have to go into the meeting, and that's how it works. It's pretty straightforward for the company.
And then contingency plans, worst case scenario, tech issues during the virtual
Yep.
meeting, might be an individual director. You talk about the last 100 feet. Some people don't have the greatest internet connection. Maybe they're in a far off land. What can they do? Who can they reach? You talked about a dedicated representative from Broadridge being available, but does that include someone on the tech side too?
Yes. So there's one. Yes. So obviously we think the meeting being successful, there's nothing more important to us is that the meeting happens. So we have got a lot of, plans in place to make sure it happens. There's the contingency plan, like if, XYZ happens, we go to, the next step in the process. So for every one of our meetings, our team knows exactly what has happened. So if it's a video meeting, for example, and the video signal went down, we can revert to a phone line, for example, because phone line, analog phone lines are like the most robust technology there is out there. So there's ways we can ensure that the meetings happen. And we've had 100% success rate with the meetings that have been produced on the Broadridge platform. And I think it's a result of not only our planning process, but also our just robust infrastructure on which all the Broadridge systems run. So that's very important to us. So we put plans in place, but then there's there's the last mile things that you're talking about, which is just the stuff that happens that the meeting might be successful, but certain participants in the meeting might be having, more challenges than others. So we do have not only our event person who's managing the meeting itself, but we do have a team of technical people that monitors the broader range of events that are happening. And we do have support tools and communication plans in place to help those people who may be, on the company side. So again, not the shareholders. The shareholders are one set of things we worry about, but we also worry about the company getting into the meeting. Is everyone there? Can we hear everybody or see everybody appropriately for the meeting? And when we can't, how do we enable that to happen? And we think as the platform provider, it's on us to make sure that we put those plans in place so that everyone is in the meeting. Is it, again, the last mile is always difficult, right? Sometimes your internet connection goes down, stuff does eventually happen, but we do think to be able to always revert to a phone line to get everyone into the meeting is what has enabled us, to ensure the success at every meeting.
Yeah, if you do audio only, that's legal and that's a meeting. So let's talk about the shareholder side. Companies have the option, as I understand it, of just allowing, people that have been confirmed as shareholders using control numbers to get in, or a company can choose to allow guests, which could be someone that's validated as a guest, or the third category I would guess would be just let the general public in and watch the meeting. Is there anything we should know about any of those?
So in terms of, so really two options on our platform. We have shareholders who have control numbers that can get into the meeting. And I think that's sort of the common scenario. And then we do have the guest option, and the guest is everybody else. And that can include shareholders who have lost their control numbers or for whatever reason decide to just go in as a guest. So in any case, shareholders can identify themselves, that we can ask for name, address, email address, etc. If it's a guest, we do require that they submit that information to the company. Interestingly, 70% of meetings on our platform, give or take, allow guests. So many companies do allow guests because when guests are in the meeting, they really kind of in listen-only mode, where they're hearing the presentation or seeing the presentation, but they don't have the ability to ask on our platform. They cannot ask questions, and they obviously can't vote shares they don't own. So they can see the basics of the meeting and listen to the meeting, but it's not like they can in any way disrupt the meeting, or they don't cause any challenges for the company. And we encourage companies to allow guests to their meeting because we think it's a great option, to allow your employees who may not be shareholders or, the local community or whoever might be of interest. So I think it's a great option. I'm surprised it's not actually higher than the numbers we're seeing, because I think it is such a great option. Now, going to the future, and we just released in November a press release about this. One of the issues for this year, there was a very quick turnaround of companies who had to make a decision on a virtual meeting when they weren't expecting to do that. And not every company is using Broadridge for that capability. And if they did choose another provider, for the beneficial shareholders that Broadridge validates, they do have to request a legal proxy and go through a somewhat manual process to get to that other meeting. So that was an issue that I'm sure you and others have read about this year, happening during 2020. And we did reach out to the other agents, and we did put some behind the scenes processes in place to streamline that process as much as possible. But in the 2 to 3 weeks we had between the time the economy shut down and everyone switching to virtual, there wasn't a lot of time to do anything with technology. But fast forward, in the time we've had since then, we've started planning in the summer, how do we make that process better for the industry? And so we have launched APIs that will enable a beneficial holder that's been processed by Broadridge and has a 16-digit Broadridge control number to be able to be validated onto another agent's platform. So if it's not a Broadridge VSM, the issuer can choose another platform, and we will help facilitate those shareholders via APIs. This is the way to do it because it's a secure mechanism. It doesn't require the shareholder to do any pre-registration or any 5 days in advance they have to request a legal proxy. This is a very seamless way for them to leverage the information that's in the materials they're already getting, and they can use that information to enter another platform, and we will validate them and enable them to vote via a link that we are creating. So I think that's a really big improvement for the industry. It's a commitment by Broadridge because we really believe in this virtual meeting technology, and our platform is great, and we hope many companies choose our platform, and they do, because it is a very robust platform and it has a lot of features and functions. But if the company chooses to use another platform, we still we want to be behind the ability for all retail holders or all holders to be able to get into whatever meeting is happening, because it's an important governance event, and enabling access to that meeting is the first step in making the meeting great, including all the other Q&A and all the other tools. But you got to get people in first to make all those other things happen. So we are going to enable that to happen for next proxy season.
Yeah, it's interesting you called it an important governance event, because there's been a movement for a couple decades where maybe it wasn't considered by some to be an important governance event, but because of the pandemic and the way that some companies had to do it on the fly, the way some companies handled their annual meeting, I think more attention than ever has been placed on the annual meeting. So doing it right this year is more important than ever, I think, because institutional investors are tuning in, sometimes members of the media, and then so people are watching, and it's important to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about dress rehearsals. I think that's important for companies to go through, even though for those that did it for the first time last year, they've done it one time, and so now they have some experience. Do representatives from Broadridge typically get involved with the dress rehearsal, or companies are able to do that on their own?
So I think there's like what we call the dress rehearsal and dry runs. And I would make a distinction between the two because there is a little bit of a difference, and there's definitely a difference in what Broadridge needs to support. If a company is doing a dress rehearsal, meaning they're running through their script and they're practicing who's going to say what, generally Broadridge or the other providers, we don't have to be part of those discussions or those meetings because it really is about the internal company, what they have to do. Although companies do prefer us to be on, I think they just like to have the support. Then what we call a dry run, that's actually a much more technical experience when they actually want to run through the meeting with the technology, doing the streaming, doing the, with the operator and having the whole thing as if it's the event. Now, not every company does that. And I'll tell you where there's some issues. There were some issues and challenges with the dry runs last year. And that's because, on a dime, everybody went to virtual meetings. So every operator that we work with, all the webcast providers, everyone was inundated with virtual meetings, not just virtual shareholder meetings, but all the virtual events that were happening. And the resources to do dry runs, a technical and full dry run, were not always available, or were not available at the times companies wanted. So we really did have to finesse that a little bit and try to space it out. I mean, talk about having to move things to Monday and Friday or Saturdays. We really tried to accommodate companies as we could based on the schedules of the operators that we're working with and the webcast providers and things like that. So that the dry runs are really challenging. Dress rehearsals, we are easy to support. We can have a client service person run through with companies, but again, they don't need us on those, but there's a lot of comfort in having the person who's managing your event with you during those.
Yeah. So what about archiving the meeting? How, I assume the functionalities there, I've actually seen them, of course, online. Yeah. Some companies keep them up, but companies don't have, there's not a requirement for them to post an archive of the meeting. But how easy is that for companies to do?
It's so easy, they don't have to do anything. We actually archive every meeting. So it's recorded and we post it for the company if they want it. They really don't have to do anything but tell us they want it done. And we will post it on our own site, virtualshareholdermeeting.com, or we will provide the file to the company and they can post it on their own website, or they can link to our website. So it is such a simple process if the company wants it. Now, if the company, and we keep it up for 12 months, by the way, we will keep it up longer or shorter if the company requests that. That's not really a big deal at all. So, some companies want it and some companies don't. It's an absolute easy option for us. Most companies do want, like to have the pre-record, like to have the, recording playback available. And most of them do keep it on our site just because they don't have to do anything but link to it if they want to share it with others. So they're all available at the company's request.
So any last tips for us?
Sure. So, we've spent a lot of time since last proxy season talking to various constituents, whether they were investors or shareholders or the companies or the inspectors who worked on a lot of the meetings to find out what went well and what, could have been improved. And we have a very robust roadmap to make these meetings even better than I think they were last season. And so there's kind of three areas that we're working on. Number one is the platform itself, to create this next generation modern platform with full video integration, the Zoom-like capability so that everyone can be seen and heard. So that's number one. Number two is the meeting management. How do you make it as easy as possible for the company that is conducting this meeting? This is technology that is, for many of these, they've not used before, or they're using it once a year if they are a previously used client for us. So how do you make everyone comfortable? How do you make that whole participant experience as seamless as possible? So we're really spending a lot of time thinking about that issue. And the last thing is what I've already talked about, which is the Q&A. How do you make that as transparent as possible so that everyone who is attending these meetings feels like they were heard, that there was no hiding behind the technology, and that this is a really great alternative to a physical meeting. So we are excited about the future of virtual meetings and all the things that we think technology can bring to make this process even better.
Yeah, as always, Broadridge is ahead of its time. I mean, I remember the first virtual meeting in Forte back in, I think it was 2001, that did it by fax. And then when you all started doing, built your platform out, I guess it's 5, 6, 7 years ago in Mary Ellen.
2009.
9? Wow.
2009, the first
Yeah,
virtual.
that's amazing. And seeing the growth, it was, relatively slow, but upwards for a number of years. And then the last few years, it was exploding. And then now, of course, I think it's going to be hard to put the genie back in the bottle in terms of, I think there'll be hybrid meetings. I mean, there was always about 500 hybrid meetings, I think, for a while. But a lot of companies are going to find there's value to being more transparent, having it online, and how easy it is to do. So thank you so much, Cathy. That was wonderful.
Thanks, Brock. Appreciate your having me.